Today, we're joined by a panel of experts who each have an extensive amount of experience building internet measurement projects and systems at scale. We're really happy to be joined by everyone that's here today. And basically, what we wanted to do is just have an open discussion about what the challenges of this kind of work are and and get a better understanding of what of those challenges are shared, and also which ones are just unique to our individual efforts. Because although we all have internet measurement in common here, there are a lot of ways to do that, and the folks that we have with us today have a really diverse set of approaches. So there are also, of course, many people besides the ones here today that do this kind of work. And so our hope is that we're just sort of starting the conversation about, again, shared challenges and also possible ways that our different initiatives and efforts can support one another to keep the internet measurement community and ecosystem growing and sustainable. So with that, I'm going to pass it to the panelists to introduce themselves. So just name, org, title, and then a few sentences about how you've worked on internet measurement over the years, and then describe a challenge you've experienced, particularly when measuring the internet at scale. And there's no wrong answers here, of course. I'll start with Georgia as my co-facilitator, and then we can popcorn.
Wait, Lai, do you want to answer your versions of those questions first? Or
no? No.
Okay. Well, hi, everybody. I'm Georgia Bullen. I have been mostly working with Measurement Lab since 2012 in various forms. So a little over 10 years, 12 years. In doing that, I've also gotten to talk to and work with a lot of the people and projects who are going to talk to us today. So, but the main project that I've been a contributor to is Measurement Lab, or directly, I should say. Your other question was, orgs. Yeah, so I am on the advisory committee for Measurement Lab. I also run another nonprofit in the space called Super Bloom Design, so I wear a few hats. And a challenge, I would say it's actually the challenge that in the 10 plus years I've been working with Measurement Lab, one of the challenges I would name is figuring out how to have the right team to do the work. So like the combination, how do we, like having consistent staffing to be able to keep going on all of the tasks. So like the matching up of the how, the who, and the funding and all of those things. But that should tell you that basically I've had to manage that. With that, I will pop. Should I just go down the list, like, does that make sense? Should we? Okay, so I'll hand it over to Jim. You're at the top of the list.
Oh, very good. Hi, all. I'm Jim Cowie. I am currently a fellow at the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society at Harvard. I'm also the instigator of a project called the Internet History Initiative, which you can find at internethistoryinitiative.org. My history goes back to around 2000 when I founded Renesas, and we worked on BGP collection and traceroute for almost 20 years, I guess, until we were acquired and subsequently disappeared, which leads to my challenge. The challenge I had was actually preserving my own internet measurement data legacy for the future, because we didn't think about it. We collect our data, we think it's going to be there forever, and I'm here to tell you, one day your data can be gone. So maybe this is something we can talk about at greater length during the call. So that's not a challenge of internet measurement. It is a challenge of, as they say, it's not taking the reservation, it's holding the reservation. It's a challenge of holding on to your data. So all good.
If we want to, yeah, go ahead. I would say we're going to David Belson if you want to go next when we run down the list.
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is David Belson. I'm the head of data insight at Cloudflare. And that largely means that I am responsible for Cloudflare Radar, radar.cloudflare.com. I come to internet measurement over the last 15 years or so. Started out in 2008 at Akamai, where I launched the State of the Internet report. Published that for 10 years, moved to Oracle with their Internet Intelligence Initiative, built on a lot of what Jim had started. Moved to the Internet Society, where I was involved in what ultimately became Internet Society Pulse, their measurement and statistics platform. And now I've been at Radar, Cloudflare Radar for the last couple of years. In terms of a challenge, I think I would probably build on what Georgia called out in terms of the value of a team. At Cloudflare, at Akamai, I had part of one person that was supporting me, and it made really evolving things a significant challenge. Whereas at Cloudflare now, there's actually a whole team of folks, back end, front end, data scientists that are supporting Radar. So I think it really enables us to do a lot more in terms of measurement and sharing and visualizing those measurements.
I'm up next, I guess. Zachary Bischof. I'm a research scientist at Georgia Tech, and there I primarily work on IODA. So I do a lot of work on either thinking of ways to improve IODA's current signals or new signals that we can add, and kind of different ways to get insights into internet outages. And yeah, if you're not familiar with IODA, it stands for the Internet Outage Detection and Analysis. Prior to joining Georgia Tech as a grad student about 15 years ago, I started working on, if any of you are familiar with some of these like BitTorrent measurement tools like DASU or ONO, for example, I started working on those as a grad student. And DASU in particular was focused on ISP characterization. I think for that, I actually wrote the module that was doing NDT measurements to measure throughput. So I think I may be responsible for more NDT measurements than just about anybody else. But since then, I've also worked on, for example, mapping IP addresses to physical locations and trying to identify paths to different conduits and cables and things like that. As far as challenges, I was going to go with something similar to Jim originally, just that when we were working on DASU, this was led by different grad students, and unfortunately, the long-term success of the project kind of deteriorated after everybody left. So that's another difficult thing, especially for research, is being able to maintain funding long-term for these tools, or kind of evolve and adapt to different measurements that are needed in the future. For example, the platform that we were using for DASU kind of died out, is no longer popular. So being able to maintain and adapt measurements over time, I think, is a big challenge. And then kind of related to that is, as you are adapting these challenges, is being able to kind of keep different versions of your data measurements in mind over time, and whether or not you can actually directly compare them, which I think is, if you want to compare internet performance today to 10 years ago, for example, NDT, I know, has changed with multiple versions. So that can be a bit, I think, of a big challenge in the whole space. I guess we're skipping Georgia and hand it off to Robert.
Okay, great. Hi, I'm Robert Kishtaraki. I work as a principal engineer for Drive NCC. I've been here for, a bit more than 18 years. For most of it, I've been managing the research and development team. And as a part of that, I was the architect behind a system which some of you might know called Ripe Atlas. So that's our active internet measurement platform. But we also run RIS, the Ripe Routing Information System, that has been there since 1999, collecting BGP data. And I'm still working a lot with Ripe Atlas and the data and partners therein. From my perspective, there are a whole lot of challenges, but the ones that I would highlight are the difficulty of running such a system for a long time. I think not a lot of people appreciate what it takes to run something for 20, 25 years. And having to deal with the changing technology behind it, the changing team, how do you actually keep it running while the people are coming and going? The increasing scale, the funding difficulties, which all of us seem to see in one way or another. A different one is, how big is big enough for such a measurement system? What can you possibly observe at what scale? Do you have to have representation in every corner or not in order to actually see stuff that is happening? what you can call biases and what you can call diversity in a system. And then relating to what Jim said, long-term data retention is a thing. It's really easy to collect data and say, we're just going to put it in the corner and make it available. But then if you have to do that for 10 years or longer, or 20, all of a sudden that becomes a different problem. Hi, Jim. So that's, I guess we can dive into some of these later on. And I'm going to hand it off to Amrish.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Amrish Fokia, working for the Internet Society. I work there as a co-leader of the Measuring the Internet project, which David worked on at some point. So we maintain a platform called the Internet Society Pulse, which basically curates data from third-party data sources and produce health metrics, basically to understand how the health of the internet is evolving over time. Earlier on, I was at Afrinic, also running the research department there, where I've done quite a lot of work on understanding the different internet dynamics on the African market, and a lot of work I've done understanding latency in between countries and clustering them in terms of the similarities that they had. And yeah, more recently, I would say I've been working on understanding peering, the peering ecosystem. We have a big project at the Internet Society understanding the networking benefits and also the economic benefits of peering. And in that would also go studies such as content locality, because as you know, the closer the content to the end users, the better. So, but it's not the case everywhere. So these are the things that we are interested in and looking at the moment. So in terms of challenges, of course, a platform like the Internet Society Pulse, we depend heavily on third-party data sources. And as you mentioned already, those data sources sometimes have trouble to keep on going over time. So this has an impact on the quality of information that we can produce, because we need to have data in a reliable fashion and also over time, so that we can compare that things are improving. And if, let's say, the metrics keep changing, it is difficult to keep that analysis going. So yeah. Thank you. Who's next? Maria.
Maria gets to round us up.
Thanks, Amrish. And thank you, MLab, for hosting this discussion and for bringing us all together. This is very exciting. Hi, everyone, and those who joined us. My name is Maria, and similar to Jim, I'm also currently a research fellow at the Berkman Klein Center. We're doing a fellowship together, and I also work with the Open Observatory of Network Interference, which is known as UNI. And UNI is a free software project that started 12 years ago in 2012. And we basically provide free software tools that anyone can install in order to run a variety of different experiments on the networks that they're connected to in order to measure different forms of internet censorship. And thanks to our community, we have the opportunity to collect measurements from around the world. We publish them as open data in real time. And since 2012, we've had the opportunity to publish more than 2 billion network measurements covering 27,000 networks in almost every country around the world. Based on this data, we do a lot of analysis ourselves, and we also work with researchers and advocates who are interested in making use of the data. I think I can definitely relate with a lot of the challenges that were already discussed. But I think from our perspective, probably one of the biggest challenges that we've had over the years, and which is an ongoing challenge, is having the ability to automatically detect and characterize more forms of internet censorship at scale. And by this, what I mean is that on the one hand, there are some blocks that we're able to automatically detect based on fingerprints, but then there's a variety of many other types of blocks that is actually very challenging to automatically confirm at scale. And so this is probably one of the biggest problems that we've been working towards, and we're currently in the process of designing and building a new data processing pipeline, which we aim to ship in production within the next months. And this is one of the things that we're working towards addressing this problem.
Thank you, Maria. So I heard, thank you, everybody. I was just taking some notes on what I heard everybody say, but ranging from running the system, maintaining the system, like data life cycles and changes, collaboration, interpretation, like all of the things. And so I think we were thinking maybe a good first question to just ask folks to chime in on building on all of that is to dig into the holding and maintaining the data questions. So I think that was definitely a common theme that I heard amongst folks. But yeah, does anyone want to, what is the value of, maybe just to ask a provocative question that Lai and I have been talking about a bit, like what is the value of holding on to longitudinal data sets, and like what are the things that people have run into, right? You mentioned some already, but what does that bring up if you like reflect on that question? Like how much are we storing? For how long do we store it? Like, what do we do with it? That kind of thing. If anyone wants to jump in. Go for it, Maria. Yeah.
Thanks. I think that's a great question. I think how long a project stores data really depends on the projects of the goals of the project. We definitely think that there's immense value in storing the data in the long term. On the one hand, to support longitudinal studies and to be able to examine censorship trends and to basically evaluate like how things on the internet changed over time. You're only really able to have that if you have continuous long-term data. But also from an analysis perspective, in order to be able to characterize different forms of censorship, you need to have some previous data for comparison. Like you literally cannot, your data analysis capabilities are extremely limited unless you have this long-term coverage. And to put it differently, your ability to have valuable insights based on the data depends on this long-term and stable coverage. So from that perspective, I think it's very valuable. It can also, I think it can support both short-term and long-term research efforts. Short-term research efforts, for example, spanning over the last month or over the last year, that can be particularly useful for rapid response efforts. And I think internet measurement data can be extremely valuable for a lot of advocacy groups who want empirical data that can potentially serve as evidence that they can use as part of their advocacy. But also long-term data can be useful for court cases, especially if that data serves as evidence of intentional blocking. And court cases usually, they take long, it can take forever to have a certain judgment and so on. So you really need to have that long-term data available in order to be able to bring positive change from a legal perspective. And then also like in terms of journalistic reporting. So there's so many different use cases, whether it's from journalistic reporting, advocacy, short-term research, long-term research, supporting future historians to be able to understand what was happening on the internet during our time and to be able to do comparisons. All of this requires this sort of long-term storage. But again, that's why I think it really depends on what the goals of your project are. And that will inform like what type of data you collect, what types of questions you're trying to answer will inform what experiments you design and what data you collect and so on, and why you're collecting it and who you're collecting it for and so on. So yeah, these are some of the questions that we think about.
Anyone else want to? Yeah, go ahead, Robert.
Excellent answer. From my perspective, one interesting factor is the sheer volume of the data that we've collected over the years, and basically the availability and the practicality of making that available. In our case, we're talking about terabytes and petabytes of data. Nobody's going to download that just to analyze it, right? So you kind of have to pre-process to extract the value that you think is in there, and make that constantly available so that if someone actually wants to zoom in on something particular, then they know kind of what to access and what to analyze there. So that's a hard question, because it kind of assumes that you know what is valuable in your data, and you kind of already pre-extract that. But what if you're wrong and you have collected something that actually shows some value, but you didn't know that in that time? So will anyone ever go back to that data and say, actually, I know that there is a signal there that you haven't pointed out yet? So I find that to be very interesting. And then one related question is, how does that value change over time? when you have data that goes back to years or even dozens of years, is the value still there, or does that diminish over time? And I guess I don't have the answer to that question, because it also depends on why you're asking and what are you asking specifically. But there is this perception that throwing out data is wrong. Never do that, please. And the other perspective on this one is that, yeah, but that was collected years ago, so who cares anymore? You know, we live in the real world now. So I guess, as I said, it depends on what the question you have.
Yeah. Awesome. Jim?
Yeah, so yes to both of those responses. I don't want to only tell sad stories about internet measurement collection, but I will tell one sad story. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Pinger project, which ran at Stanford's SLAC in Les Cottrell's group since the late 90s. It was running right up until June of this year. And Les stepped out and retired. And within, I think, just a couple of months, that data was gone. And I've stepped in and talked to the SLAC guys, and we have found copies of it, and I am backing it up now to retrieve it, but it's a very near thing. And so in terms of long-term preservation, why you would do it, all the reasons we've thought about, one of the really good ones is that you, as Robert said, you often don't know what questions researchers after you are gone will want to ask about this data, and it's irreplaceable, right? You can't run these measurements again. So, and the methodologies that you use at the time might not, to make derived data or to filter the data or only save the important data, may actually not be the things that the future historians find useful. As an example, the SLAC data in its derived forms often doesn't include the IP addresses, it only includes the domain names. And so I had to find out that you go down to the raw data, oh, okay, the IP addresses are still there. The summary statistics don't contain them. The data is fantastically valuable. If you have a choice, at least, you know, buy an insurance policy, figure out a long-term strategy for the retention of the raw stuff, and treat it, you know, ask for help from people in archival spaces, librarians, for example, who can talk about how to preserve data. The Internet Archive, I think, you know, just had a brush with mortality just last week. They are now thinking about, well, maybe we should have computed MD5 hashes for our raw scrapes because we don't know if they were modified, right? You have to think about these kind of long-term preservation issues just for the raw bulk tier. The derived stuff, okay, we can think about that another time, but think like
Yeah,
that.
I think
my advice.
Yeah, picking up on some of the threads of this, I mean, I'm partly hearing there's an interesting challenge I see here, and this kind of brings me back to like the thing that I was saying at the beginning of like the team. Like we need librarians, we need researchers, we need people who are using it in applied contexts, right? We need like systems engineers, and I mean, there's a bunch of us on here who all run different projects, right? And it's like it's making me wonder about the like who's not involved that should be, or like what's been some of the missing things. I think I'm also the other thing I would pick back up on is the thing that Amrish mentioned about how metrics change, like how things change over time. So a lot of these, I mean, the theme for me in general is like this actually requires a lot of human capacity and technical capacity, right? That's frequently limited. I'm curious if folks have lessons they could share of how they've navigated that, or yeah, just like ideas that come up from that. Can we get Brewster Kale involved in the chat? Great question. Yeah, great question. Yeah, like should the Internet Archive be more involved in archiving internet measurements? That's a great prompt. Go ahead, Maria. Yeah.
Sorry, is the question like how do we navigate having both technical capacity and human support capacity in the
Lessons you've learned from navigating it, like things you might share just based on the problems we've been describing, because we are talking about like a pretty complex set of actors, right, that need to be involved here, and that is bringing to a lot of the challenges we brought up. But yeah, go ahead if you.
Yeah, no, thanks for the clarification. Yeah, no, that's a great question, and I think yeah, from our perspective, like on the for sure, especially from UNI's perspective, what we've definitely seen is the power of global community participation in censorship measurements. I think that's probably one of the most important things we've learned. in the sense, in many senses, in the sense that if we actively engage communities around the world in the design process of our tools will probably end up being more useful to them. They will use them more, and therefore we'll get more measurements. If we include them having the sort of a constant feedback loop helps ensure that we're also informed in terms of what are some of the censorship patterns that they're seeing or new censorship events, which can help inform the improvement of either our existing experiments or we can get input from local communities on which new experiments we should be designing. And so that also improves our ability to practically measure more forms of censorship or to measure it better. Also having like this constant feedback and getting from communities like all the local context, which is also very valuable for understanding censorship events and understanding like how to do these sorts of experiments is very useful. But also getting from them alerts, like being notified when new censorships are going to happen, or based on local context, knowing when new censorships are likely to emerge. That is also super valuable, and that is something that is difficult to derive from the data itself. And that in itself can then help improve experiments, measurement, boosting the measurement coverage, and so on. But more importantly, I think by engaging communities, you can help ensure that they're users of your data, because collecting the data is great and all, storing the data is great and all, but if no one's using it, then why are we even collecting the data, right? And I think the question is, what is the impact we want to see in the world based on the data? Why are we collecting this data to begin with? And I think engaging communities around the world to make use of the data, from our perspective, is one of the most important things. And that's how you can end up seeing the data as part of third-party research and advocacy efforts and so on to help bring positive social change. From the technical perspective, I touched upon it a little bit previously, which is that in the past, like maybe 10 years ago and before that, the way that before most websites were on HTTPS, at the time, we used to see blog pages more commonly, and so a lot of those forms of censorship are very easily fingerprintable, and it's very easy to automatically detect and confirm them. But now that most websites are in HTTPS, we're basically seeing through any data that more and more around the world, one of the more prevalent forms of censorship is TLS-based interference, which practically that requires the use of some sort of DPI or some censorship equipment to be able to implement that, to specifically be able to time out the connection or reset it like right after the first client hello message. And so what we're seeing is that in a lot of countries where previously we didn't observe any blocks, we're now starting to not only observe blocks, but we're starting to see that they're implementing it in this way, which sort of suggests that there might be a proliferation of the censorship equipment going around the world. So what this means is that for a lot more countries in comparison to the past, it's much easier for them to implement blocks faster and much more effectively, and in a way that is harder to circumvent in comparison to the past. I think this is very concerning because definitely, on the one hand, it makes censorship less transparent, because instead of seeing a block page, the user instead gets a connection, just sees like an error message. But it also, from the analysis perspective, it makes it much harder to automatically detect and confirm at scale, which is the analysis challenge that I was mentioning before. And I think, again, this highlights that not only do we need to, as a community, boost our data analysis capabilities, and I really would like to highlight this because I think there's a lot of appetite in the community to constantly develop new experiments, and that's great and everything, but there's also a lot of data out there already that we're not analyzing. So I think the question is, what insight can we draw from that? And then how can we make that data usable and useful for communities so they can use it as part of their work?
Yeah. I'm going to jump to Amrish just because you haven't spoken up yet, and then come back to Robert. But yeah, go ahead, Amrish.
Thanks. Yeah, I think my point is going to be on standardization. So we have a problem of abundance over here. Like, everyone is producing loads of data, but no one is producing in the same way. No one is collecting the data the same way. No one is archiving it the same way and presenting it the same way. So then it becomes difficult for anyone who wants to retain this data or to over time, and also to process it and extract meaningful information. It becomes extremely difficult. So perhaps there is an opportunity here as a community to to see where perhaps we can have common points and maybe standardize the way we do things, even if we are we are measuring different parts of the internet, but maybe the collection standards and retention standards. These are things that we can discuss and perhaps have a common ground.
Yeah. Robert and then David.
Yeah, one interesting aspect is where does one spend their energy? We all have finite energy and the teams are finite as well. So there's only so much we can do with things. And many times I see my team being excited about various aspects, but then we have to keep the lights on at the same time. So there's only so much we can do in exploring things. We are trying to do our best to do continuous analysis and visualizations and being ahead of the curve in terms of extracting value. But as I said, it's finite. So I think there's a lot of value, as the others say, in collaboration, where you can say, here's what we do. We collect the data, and there is value in this. And people find that, and researchers discover that. So I think that kind of collaboration, where we do the collection and someone else does visualization or analysis or AI. I'm sorry for saying that word, but machine learning or whatever that is valuable as well.
David,
yeah. Thanks. I just wanted to build on, I guess, 2 points. One is around what Maria was saying in terms of the groups and organizations that are making the data available. I think that's something that's super valuable in terms of corroboration. Some of the examples she was talking about. I know that there's new radar data that can help corroborate some of those observations, and we certainly use UNI data and IODA data and Google Transparency Report data to validate and confirm observations we're seeing in our data. So yeah, I definitely agree that more organizations that are making those measurements generally available and easy to consume is very valuable. And then there was a comment about standardization also. If I remember correctly, and Zachary maybe confirm this, but I think that Alberto at IODA at some point had drafted something that talked about that at least put out a framework for standardizing the way that some of these data sets could be made available. I think one of the challenges there is that each organization that's doing those measurements or collecting those data sets are generally doing it for their own purpose. So they're formatting it and storing it and sampling it and whatnot, for their particular purposes, for their particular limitations, and to try to then, I guess, sort of standardize that across the industry may be a little bit of a challenge.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna follow up a little bit. Yeah, I know Alberto's done some work in that space, but I know it can even be a real problem with. I mean, as you kind of hinted at, David, in terms of applying for how it applies to different usages. It's if you take something, for example, as simple as just traceroute. Well, there's a whole bunch of different traceroute implementations. There's a whole bunch of different packet protocols that you could be using for the packets. All of these things could have different results and different impact on how you analyze these, or what you would see if you're analyzing these. You might see something different with different tools and slightly different implementations. So it's one thing we talked a bit too about kind of preserving either the raw data or kind of the simplified form of the data. I think in addition to that, you need a lot of details about how it was collected, whether it's specifics on the version number of whatever tool you're using can even be tremendously important. This is all really important if you're trying to do longitudinal studies and you want to reproduce a study and see if you're, for example, right now in my group, we're reproducing this work that's about 20 years old. And the paper's not super clear on the methodology in all aspects. And we want to make sure that we're doing it correctly. And so the first thing that we're trying to do is reproduce this on data that's 20 years old. But we are getting different results in the paper, and we're trying to figure out what's causing this. But I think there's a lot of different ways that that kind of quirks in the data can pop up, and I think it's something that we don't always necessarily think about when we're writing our measurement tools.
Awesome. Lai, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I'll hop in and just ask, like, I want to pull on this standardization thread because it's something that we think about a lot at Measurement Lab. I mean, I guess I'm wondering what we think the main blockers to standardization are. We've all talked about it being difficult, but like, what are the things that we find difficult about it? And then I'm also wondering, and partially selfishly because I have my own answer to this, but like, what are the things that it would enable, or why is it so important? Like, why do we want to be able to standardize? My answer is just observing that, going back to Maria's point about making the data useful, it's actually very difficult to make the data useful when there's 75 different ways to measure, for example, speed or anything else. And so when people are trying to use the data, it can be difficult for them to make a decision about what's best for their use case because it's unclear what the relationship between all these different methodologies are. And so again, I'm wondering kind of what are the things that we would be able to solve with more standardization, but then also what are the blockers? Like, why is that difficult? And also if we can speak more too about just what does that look like? Are we talking standardization of data format, of the actual measurement methodology? Like, what would that actually look like? And Belson, I saw your hand go up immediately, so let's go to you.
Sure. I think one low-hanging fruit there is IP address geolocation. There's a number of different vendors out there who all have slightly different, techniques and then of course results. So making sure that we're all looking at sort of the same place, the same thing, I think is really important for standardization. I do a lot of work around internet shutdowns and disruptions. And there's, sometimes we see social posts from various organizations that say, hey, there's an issue, a disruption observed in a particular place. And, we look at our data, we're not seeing it. And then it could potentially be because, we're using two different data sets for geolocation. So I think that's one potential starting point.
Yeah, thank you, Maria.
Yeah, thanks. On the question of standardization, so I've been hearing this desire to standardize, and sort of standardize the data formats across projects for 8 years now. And what I've been curious to understand is basically why. And I know we've already discussed this a little bit to some extent, but I don't know. The reason why I asked this question is because on the one hand, I think every measurement project, apart from having very distinct goals, as was also highlighted by Belson, every project is asking very different questions. And depending on the questions that you're asking, you're designing entirely different experiments, you're measuring different things, and depending on what you're measuring and why you're measuring and how you're measuring it, that will also influence like the type of data that you collect and the format and so on. And also the format will depend on your existing system and how that builds in and what's sustainable and so on. And that will change over time. And even if we were to come to some understanding of standardization and say, okay, we're going with this, who's to say that our platforms would not change over the next years? They probably would. And probably each of our platforms would change in very different ways because we work in different ecosystems, asking different questions and addressing different needs. So I don't know. I'm a bit skeptical about whether the feasibility, like in the long term, in light of all of this, but also I think there is value in diversity. I think the fact that our data sets are very different is a strength, not a weakness. And in relation to this, the main argument that I see in favor of standardization is basically to make analysis across data sets easier. And so on that point, I would very love to hear from someone who has attempted to analyze all these different data sets, like what are the practical challenges that they're faced, which would need standardization. Especially because when I think about it, like every data set has its own unique strengths and strengths and limitations. And I think there is value when you're analyzing data to take into account the unique strengths and limitations of each data set, and then see how you can complement that in comparison to other data sets and so on.
I want to jump to, I see David and Jim's hands, but one thing that I'm just to tease out that I'm hearing in what you're saying, Maria, is also defining what we mean by standardization, because I think there's like, you mentioned data formats, and then I think folks have also been talking about like methodology of collection, and some of this is also about nomenclature, right? So I'm just to like, what word are we using for what thing? So just to name, those are all like different ways I've heard us say standardization. But yeah, Jim, hopefully I didn't say what you were going to say. Let's go. Jump in.
real quickly, I also would put a thumb on the scale for standard geolocation of resources. The same, I like the idea of there being diversity, and I think we've all reinvented geolocation of everything over and over and over. Unfortunately, if there were going to be standardization, I'd rather it be in the open as part of our community instead of everybody just quietly deciding to use MaxMind, which is, all glory to the MaxMind guys, but it's not great geolocation. So there are better things you could use. So yeah, if we're going to have standardization, let's at least have it be visible instead of accidental synchronization and on the same biases and mistakes.
Although I'll say on that front, we just, if we're doing this, we're going to create another data set that now needs to be archived because geolocation changes potentially frequently. If you're looking at traceroute data from 2003, is that prefix, was it part of Verizon, or was it part of Spectrum, or was it part of whatever at that point? I mean, Jen, you've lived through this.
I'm like, please, yes. Oh, it needs to, right. We need a point in time source of, where was this IP address on September 12th, 2001, please.
Mm-hmm.
And Amrish, not to put you on the spot, but I am curious from the ISOC Pulse perspective in terms of trying to aggregate a bunch of these different data sets, to Maria's question of, what is it? Is that hard? Or what are the challenges when trying to bring these together?
Yeah, definitely it's not an easy task, but somehow we are managing because as you pointed out, there are different ways, and more we are using JSON format and things like that, which make it relatively easy. Even if you have, we need to go through some obstacle like merging the different data sets, because I can have like two different data sets talking about shutdown, but they might have different date formats and everything, which basically there is always an obstacle to merge data. But my point on standardization was, of course, we cannot standardize. We cannot have a standard for every type of data that we are building. But we could perhaps think about the high level, maybe on the metadata side of things. Perhaps all the data sets that are producing needs to have some sort of metadata that can help archivers do their job better. So if we are missing that, if we don't have that, maybe it will make the job of a librarian or an archivist more difficult eventually. So maybe these are things that perhaps we could think of a common ground. But yeah, I think things have improved over time. It's now become more easier to merge data sets together, but still different organizations produce data in different formats, documents, types, and everything. So I say it's a mixed bag for now.
Yeah, thanks everyone. I wanted to return back to a thread that Georgia posed earlier, just regarding like who else can we be thinking of as part of this effort? So both Jim and Georgia, I've had conversations with you about different kind of ecosystems that you're starting to think about as potential, stakeholders in the internet measurement world. So Jim, you've been working with libraries and thinking about just archives and preservation as a general framework for for the work that we do. And Georgia, I know you've been working a lot with open science and pushing all of us towards thinking about how the things that we do are part of that ecosystem as well. So maybe in that order, if you can talk a bit about what are the opportunities that you see in those spaces, and how can we, as an internet measurement ecosystem, which is quite big but also very specific, can learn from them or maybe grow with them. So just starting with Jim.
Yeah, I mean, my fellowship this year is dual with the Library Innovation Lab here at the law school, which is awesome. They are thinking about these challenges. They run PermaCC for archiving academic links. There's a lot of interest from librarians. Most large university libraries now do have a digital repository group, or even a librarian who's used to handling these things on behalf of social scientists and big data scientists and physicists and everybody else. And so they are I can report that they are receptive, a couple of the places I've talked to. They don't, if there's a difference in culture, it's that they don't feel a mandate to go out and find your data and chase you down and make sure that you're safe and it's in a repository. It's not their mandate. They offer a service. They say, we have space, we have people, we can curate, we can help you organize, but you have to go to them and close this loop before the day when your project gets closed down and it's too late. So that's one of the ecosystems that I'm exploring as a possibility.
Cool. Yeah, to give folks context on the point Slay was bringing up for what other work that I've done. We've found ourselves, Superbloom has found ourselves working a bit in more of the open science space. So we've worked with projects, and what I mean by that is that ranges from folks who are doing kind of any type of research in science, but in a more like open internet, open web, open data way, open source. So folks who are producing analysis code of, whether it's like genomic or biomedical research or environmental and data research. Like there's the thing that we're doing here with internet measurement is a like practice in a field that there are many others as well. And then there are really interesting like meta projects within that. And so, an example that comes to mind is Jupyter, like the Jupyter Notebooks ecosystem, like Jupyter as an open source analysis tool ecosystem, how that connects to data sources that might be housed at libraries, right? Or even like the roles of libraries in archiving not just data, but also versions of software and code, like how we're thinking about these things as objects and versions and things that we need to maintain and return to. Because, there's also challenges. Sorry, that just made me think about like we're talking about having the right data set to know where an IP address was at a given time, but also to sometimes you need to know like what software was running to make sure that you do the same computation, right, to get the same result. The reproducibility across these spaces is a really common theme. But I've always also just been interested in how that means like what communities are at the table, right? Is it large research labs? Is it national research programs, right? Like are all of us here part of NGOs and like public interest efforts at companies, but what no one here is fully representing like a government that cares about these things, right? Or that runs like a large research program. And I think that's an interesting point. Like what would it look like if that was if folks that were more in that space were at the table, right? This is happening in other areas of open science. And I've just been curious about how we can bring either the internet measurement community to those communities or have more crossover so that, again, we're not trying to do it all ourselves, right? We don't have to be, there's folks that are specializing in different parts of these practices. And I think that that's an opportunity, but we have to figure out how to talk to each other, right? And bring everybody into the room.
Right. Georgia, you sparked something in my mind. Part of what I'm doing this year is thinking about organizational possibilities for how to pursue this work, and are there novel or different organizational strategies we can use? One of them is really interesting. I talked to Denise McKenzie, who's from a place called thisisplace.com. They are a geospatial data trust, and they basically take care of large amounts of geospatial data for countries and places that need it. And the concept of a trust, that all of this measurement data could end up in trust, and then to have it administered under those kinds of public good terms is a fascinating kind of possibility that's out there.
Another name I would throw into that mix is Sean McDonald. So he runs oh my gosh, what is the name of the organization? Oh, he's going to kill me for not knowing it on a recorded call. I will find the link and drop it in the chat. But Sean McDonald does he started doing a lot of work around data trusts as well. The other group that comes to mind is Radiant Earth and Judd Sunwall, like some of the work that they are doing. I do think this is a thing that might be worth all of us like talking more about. And is it an opportunity? Is that a way that we also help think about sustainability? Because of the models of the way trusts are defined are embedded in a lot of what Maria has been making the point of, like, what is the community value? Who is like, how are people benefiting from this? Like, I do think that's actually a huge opportunity that we should talk about more. And I'm going to go get Sean's org, Digital Public, I think is what, let me grab it, put it in the chat.
Yeah, and maybe on the sustainability thread, we can pose as a last question, and I'll ask every panelist to offer an answer, and any answer is a good answer. But what do our projects need to be sustainable? So, of course, there's the easy answer of funding, but what does that funding go towards? What are the things that need to continue to be able to exist for this ecosystem to be sustainable, as well as our individual projects, or those go hand in hand. Maybe we'll start with Zach, and then go, and that was just because you're in my right corner. You can pop.
Yeah, so I was wondering if you could I kind of got lost in the question. Basically, I was just wondering if you could restate it.
Yeah, of course. So thinking about what do our projects need to be sustainable? And then furthermore, what does the ecosystem, meaning the internet measurement ecosystem, need to be sustainable? So I think the knee-jerk reaction is money and funding, but then what do we put that money towards? What is the budget of that, going towards?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Yeah, I kind of wish I think Amanda from IODA hopped off the call, but I almost would have asked her to chime in. But in addition to money and funding and technical development and all support, I think one of the big things for IODA is like right now for us, just maintaining, going through IODA's data and investigating what's going on and recording these things. And there's a lot of human resources going into this, and we've been trying to scale this up in terms of getting other people outside of IODA involved, trying to crowdsource some of this. But one of the really big issues that we're running into with this is like training and knowledge sharing. So I think, like you said, money is a low-hanging thing, but I think beyond that, it is kind of the dissemination of knowledge and expertise and training. And I think, if fingers crossed, nothing bad happens to IODA, for example, but if something were to happen to this project, I would like the knowledge behind it, the sweat equity, all the effort put into it. I would like that to at least survive in some way. So I guess I look at some of the work that I've done in the past. For example, there's so many like grad student projects that I worked on that some of the information got out there, published in papers, but there's so much work and stuff that I spend time on. I know other students have done the same thing. Countless hours of effort that just kind of disappears. And I think really, I think for a real long term, it's being able to have that knowledge out there and reproduced and available to other people.
Thank you. Yeah, let's go to Robert and then Jim.
Okay. As you said, of course, funding, that's the easy answer, but I would offer a different one. I think what's perhaps more important than funding is alignments of incentives. Those who fund these activities should get benefits, because otherwise this whole thing will fall apart, right? And if they don't get enough benefits, then they will stop funding. That's just as simple as that. So I think one of the key elements here is for those who run these kind of measurement platforms or want to engage, they should find a model where what they do actually pleases the people who found this. And if in the side others are happy as well, like, yay, researchers get data and PhDs are made, that's awesome. But then that in itself will not maintain the system. So I find that to be critical, and I can talk a lot about how that works in our neck of the woods, but that's details, I guess.
I mean, just a few words about one more thing that might be important. I mean, the way I'm looking at this, I took a sabbatical from internet measurement for a few years and went off and did something completely different and came back, and I feel like I have weird perspective based on that absence. I think it's important for us to, as we look for people to sustain these efforts, that we go and find people who are well outside our existing circles, people who don't know anybody on this call, people who are not familiar with the work, but would really benefit from it. So part of what I'm looking for to make this more sustainable is finding connections to other fields, social scientists in particular, who are studying all the things about civilization other than the internet, and then to bring them the fruits of our research and say, look, we have metrics that go 25 years in one day continuous time that can show you these things about your country or your region. Wouldn't it be nice to put those up alongside the things that you study as an academic? And by creating those sorts of connections and then getting their research in the hands of governments, it all kind of builds more support from the outside and love for internet measurement, because we're showing them that this is why the internet is great. This is why measurement's important. These are very specific things that we can give them.
Thank you. Yeah, and just continuing with the order on my screen. So Amrish, Maria, and then David.
Yeah, my take on that is that besides building cool research projects, we also need to build a community around it that will support it eventually. And I'm sure there are many organizations and forums that can help build or sustain this community, because sustaining this community itself is a process. Not talking about the data and the research side, but the community itself and how to keep the interest going. And if there's interest, then I suppose money will flow automatically, because we are creating an interest, we are creating a demand, and therefore we will find a way to keep those measurements and research projects going. But I think that, yeah, the community aspect is something really important.
Am I next? Yes, I agree with Amrish and with a lot of what was already said, especially like the community part. 3 points very briefly. So on the funding points, which we all agree on, specifically, I would like to highlight that diversification of funds, I think, is very specifically very important, like going forward, ensuring that we're not reliant on that most of our budget is not reliant on one funder or very few funders, because if they face challenges that can potentially jeopardize like the next years of operation of a project. And on this note, another related thing that I want to highlight is also more proactively seeking unrestricted funds, whether, for example, through basically seeking core support through private foundations or boosting the donation base. I think this is super important for sustainability in the sense that because the censorship landscape and a lot of things are constantly rapidly changing, it's very important for organizations to have the flexibility and the freedom to be able to adapt their work as needed on an ongoing basis, instead of being necessarily tied to very specific deliverables over a long period of time, but also to be able to have funds that can help grow the organization in many different areas beyond just the areas that are tied to specific activities, to ensure the overall health of the organization. So I think diversification of funds, and especially with a priority towards more unrestricted funds, is important for both the financial and organizational health of an organization, and therefore its long-term sustainability. On the question of community participation, with which I also absolutely agree, I think for sure one strategy that we've been adopting over the years is basically that through our partnership program, our goal is to basically enable and empower different existing digital rights organizations around the world who already care about internet censorship to take ownership over our tools and data and to lead that effort in their community. And I think in doing so, we see them as sort of like UNI ambassadors or running their own UNIs around the world. I think in doing this, that way, it's not just the question of our team of 8 people to sustain UNI. Like the project will continue to live through these communities who, have taken ownership and who are leading it in their countries and regions. And I think that is also very important because they feel some ownership, or at least because we strive to help them feel that sort of ownership, they will help ensure that it is as useful as possible to their communities. They will help with like localization. They will help with informing which experiments should be included. Maybe they'll even contribute experiments. They'll use the data as part of their work and so on. So I really feel that empowering communities around the world and decentralizing a lot of this work is really important to help ensure the long-term sustainability and ensure that the work continues in the long run. And I think one example that we're super happy about, and for us, yeah, this is one of the ways that we see our project going on is, for example, Senior Project, who is this fantastic digital rights organization in Malaysia. They are basically running their own UNI in Southeast Asia. And so they basically have their own partner network with organizations across Southeast Asia. And they use our tools and data completely independently from us to investigate reports and so on. They publish a variety of very in-depth research reports on internet censorship in 9 countries. And actually, I'll put in the plug, they're publishing 9 reports on the 22nd of October as part of the IMAP project. So keep an eye out for that. But this is just to say that I think this is an example of how they are doing all the stuff independently from us. And so we see that as very important for the sustainability of our project. And they also have their own funding to do that, which is, again, independent from us. And I think helping different organizations around the world get their own funding to be able to continue this type of work is also important for the sustainability and your mission to continue. And as a final thing, beyond your existing community, I think it's also important to bridge communities and maybe even find opportunities for collaborations with communities that you wouldn't necessarily think of as sort of the obvious candidates. So for example, in our line of work where we're seeing the blocking of reproductive rights websites, there is the opportunity to collaborate with organizations that defend reproductive rights. And so through that as well, you can help ensure the sustainability of your project through such collaborations. So I think in summary, ensuring the financial and also the organizational health of your organization through the diversification of funds, empowering your community to take ownership over the data, and also identifying opportunities to bridge with other communities can help with sustainability.
All right, and I'll try to make mine short. As the sort of sole commercially backed measurement project on the panel here, I don't have necessarily the opportunity to have a diversification of funds, but I think that also then goes into the point I was going to make, and I think that it's just almost restating what others have said around demonstration of value. I mean, Radar exists effectively at the whim of the Cloudflare executives. But I think as long as we continue to demonstrate value to them in various ways, I think we will continue to exist. I think that value can be demonstrated in a number of different ways. In our case, it's media coverage, it's earned media, it's things like that. I think it's also through demonstrated participation with a broader community, which is something I really like doing. I'm on this call, obviously. But I think it's another way of leveraging the training and the knowledge sharing that Zach talked about. It's another way of I think looking at the alignment of incentives that Robert talked about. But just I think we all are demonstrating the value that our projects bring in a variety of different ways. And that just really needs to be continued and reinforced with the people that we are reliant on for our existence.
Thank you, everyone, so much for your time and your answers. I think the biggest thing for us is just acknowledging that these are challenges that we're all facing and solutions that we're all trying to think through. And so it's really validating and also inspiring and helpful to hear how you're all thinking about it. Thanks, everyone who joined. We have these calls monthly. Sometimes they're community focused, sometimes they're MLab focused, but we hope you'll join us again. And this will be recorded on YouTube. We'll just be sending out an email when it's available if you want to forward it to anyone else. Thank you again for your time, and we'll talk soon.